discussion. For today's discussion, we're going to have four different guests. First of all, we have Adit Bonilla, doctor. She's a geographic doctor with over 10 years experience on community projects related to the organization of human rights endeavors, working in Chocó province. She has broad experience on territorial organization for municipalities and departments, and she's been working over 3 years as a director for the land restitution unit, where she was able to get the first judgment related to land restitution in the country. We also have good afternoon, everyone. Coming from the Chocó land unit, we have a very big challenge. Our department, Chocó, is one of the departments that has had a lot of strength in terms of territorial rights, and we had some problems with our restitution policies. Our department has over 4 million hectares. We have a very big part related to the Pacific Reserve, and based on that, we have a possibility as the only province in Colombia. Let's remember that territorial rights, we're talking about land restitution. We are working very hard on territorial rights because 93% of our territory we have collective rights related to ethnic minorities. To us, they are the majorities and they are the owners of the land. We have 108 ethnic territories, 124 belong to indigenous communities and 60 belong to black communities. The black communities have about 3 million hectares, and the indigenous communities have 1,124,000 hectares out of the 20 million hectares that we have. We have 4 natural parks, Cativo, Tata, Uchilla. This is an opportunity related to a law that we had related to individual rights. That was a very big opportunity for the black communities in the department to have something that is very strong in terms of territorial rights. For the ethnic communities, land is not only a piece of the world. They talk about territory, they talk about identity, very much related to the vision of the world, the cosmos, their culture, and the way they are related to the development of the environment. The environment is part of their culture, their practice. Their practices are coherent to safekeeping and sustainability for future generations. So the development policy at a big scale goes against the cosmos vision of these communities. For the indigenous communities, land is a mother. For the black communities, territory is everything. So we're not only talking about the concept of land, we're going into a bigger concept called territory, which includes land. We also have some cultural issues related to the right to territory. We have some beliefs, some cultures which believe that development has to go hand in hand with the environment. So for the 8 cases that we have approached during these years where we have handled this, now in Chocó we don't have ancestral territory. They are all property of someone. We have had some contradictions when we talk about the policy. Our constitution from 1991 recognizes our population as a multicultural one with different ways of looking at development. They need all to be taken into account. We also have over 70 articles that talk about respect and a consensus. Every policy that has to do with territory for ethnic communities, it has to be consultation about that. Consultation has to be informed, free, and using a language that that is relevant to the community. Some of the cases that we have documented, one of the first problems that we had were related to the first consultation. The ethnic territories were not part of the consultation process for the development of the locomotives in our country. So in our development plans, both at a province level and municipal level, they are not taking into account development plans or life plans or safekeeping plans for the communities, the different ethnic communities. They are not taking into consideration their way to develop. So all of this has an impact on the communities that have a territory, and due to their strategic positioning, we are now subjected to a lot of violence. We are very much subject to narco trafficking, to the presence of guerrilla groups, paramilitary groups, due to the situation and the location of our department. We have the presence of all these actors, Bagandí, Unguía, and Carmen del Darién. All these municipalities, we had forced displacement. There was a consensus to manipulate, to make invisible a right that these people had in order to develop and implement development policies related to oil palms. Talking about the Pacific area and corridor, we have a piece of land that is being used for illegal trafficking of guns, arms, and drugs, which is bringing about a very big problem related to territory violence. Talking about the communities, they're present. We're having a problem related to illegal mining, which has about 40 basins affected by an improper use, illegal mining activities, which is threatening the water sources, our water resources, which is paramount for human consumption and recreational purposes for the communities. We have our province has a very low development in terms of road infrastructure or river transportation infrastructure. That's our forecast. That's our outlook. We can see here how the government has a very little presence and law is not being followed. All of this has to be changed when we talk about law restitution policies. One of the most difficult things looking into this is the articulation, interinstitutional articulation that should be there in order to help us resolve all these issues that we are facing in terms of territorial rights. Territorial rights are very important. They are never going to lose the right to be proprietors of this land. What the indigenous people are asking for is the use and enjoyment of their territory, of their land, and they are now not being able to do this because we have the presence of armed forces, irregular ones, self-government, and their own right to decide the development of their department and the country. That's not being allowed either because we have the presence of these illegal armed forces and some entrepreneurs, big, small, or mid-sized, which are manipulating people there based on the problems and the ethnic issues that we have in the something very difficult as part of this process too. The institutional offer, the institutional presence that we have in terms of land restitution, they're focusing on the individual, but in Colombia they do not realize we have two different kinds of proprietors. We have the individual proprietor and the collective proprietor. This is covered by Law 70 and Law 89 from 1990. This is ratified by Law 21 from 1991. So all these contradictions leave ethnic communities in a sort of limbo. As a state government, we are trying to defend the rights, but we have some other institutional decisions that go against this. So on a daily basis, this is something that we have to face when we try to start a restitution process. the lack of understanding on the part of some judges, the lack of understanding of the black communities, and the lack of understanding of the civil code is a big problem that we have to deal with. This is not a new way of administering justice. This is a new way of looking at territory. The reason why some of the ethnic communities went into generating new activities to generate some kind of production and to register their properties, they had to do this because back in the day, there was no banking products availability. When a black person or indigenous person tried to get a credit, the first thing they ask for the banks is a mortgage or a deed in order to give him a mortgage. So the only way to get benefits from the banking institutions was to use a property, to register a property, and to get the credit. They got a mortgage on that property. This was the only way they had to get the benefits from banking products. So they had to give away their property and not production. So all these limitations related also to the improvement of their housing facilities. They also had to get a mortgage on their properties. So when you look at the registration of their properties, all in most cases, what you see is a mortgage on these properties, and this happened because, as part of the transitional justice, there was no clarity on how this could have been done. And we're talking about collective property. I'm talking about Judgment 3007 from a court in Antioquia. It's been 3 years. I remember that the day of this judgment, I was very happy, and 1 minute after, I felt very sad. Why? Because we started to look at this judgment and we realized that there was their property was restored, but the implementation was not there. So I said to myself, we will not be able to sleep from now on, because we need to make sure that our institutions are not repairing an individual. They are repairing a community with an identity, and that identity is linked to a territory. Our institutions do not understand that for the victim to want to go back to their territory, what they want from the government is a better offer of goods and services. They want drinking water, education, roads, and communications, because in Chocó, in some areas, we're still in the 12th century. You don't have mobile signal, you don't have WhatsApp, you don't have the ability to use any app, you don't have any electricity. So over there, basic need over there is a difficulty. If you have a bathroom, you don't have running water. If you have running water, you don't have a vanity. So we are in a community that doesn't have all these things, doesn't take all these things for granted. So after that, we have some indigenous communities moving around the country because they had to leave some situations that they shouldn't have had to experience after restitution. So we have to deal with people outside our territory and people within our territory. I'm talking about law 1448, and for the ethnic communities 1345, and I'm sorry, 4335 for ethnic communities. So they are giving reparation to the person who doesn't have mobility. So we have some communities that left and some communities that are within the territory, and in order to stay, they also require technology innovation, and they also need the availability of utility services. This is something that the government has to provide, the department has to provide, and the municipality has to provide. And to understand this, It's been very difficult. We have had to talk to many people in many instances. We have had many campaigns, but we don't see any movement trying to consolidate a process where the policy is respectful of the constitutional framework, because the constitutional framework is not known by all legislators, by judges, because the Constitution is very careful about ethnic rights. It is very complex for judges, for people in our judicial system to understand. People do not understand that we're trying to build something new. But what we're trying to do is that, at least for exploration and exploitation licenses, it is clearly understood. Some people do not understand. How are they going to use the soil without touching the soil? Our communities are the owners of the soil. So when you have an exploration process, you are breaking or doing away with an identity issue. People do not realize when they look at our reasoning that identity of these communities is very much related to their territory. We're not trying to make things complicated. Socialization of these projects, or mining projects or exploration projects, work like this. They go to the communities talking technical language, and the communities do not understand what they're being told. And these processes also take place when the entrepreneurs or the companies, the corporations want these processes to happen, not when the community is better suited to do it. That's what our communities have to do. There is another issue which is very frustrating for the Chocolan restitution unit. We haven't been able to get any coherent ideas within the government policies. We have 11 orders from different judges, different orders from different judges, and there is no coordination. There is difference of thought. The local judge says one thing, the department judge says something else, the national judge says something different, and the communities tell us that they do not believe in our judicial system. And as I said this to the judgment, their sentences are going to become are going to turn into something dead to us, because we're talking about territorial rights for black and indigenous communities in Chocó. We have 3% of individual titles or deeds, which are not very significant to us. The policy, different to other areas in the country, the policy to us has to be coherent, has to talk about collective rights. Nationally, we're talking a different language. Chocó is talking a different language. The mayors are saying something different locally, and the communities are in the middle of all this. All they want is the rights to be respected constitutionally. We have always told them that we are trying to take care of them. Thank you very much.